Okay, I've made a bunch of improvements. You may notice this weird second arm poking out the back of arm 2 here. That's a suggestion from Josh from Hackerspace Brisbane. Thank you, Josh. What it lets us do is home arm 2 without having to have an opto switch awkwardly at the end of the travel. So homing arm 1, now it's homing arm 2. Bam, Bob's your uncle. So this lets us avoid having to have an opto switch right out just past the end of arm 2, because I want arm 2, the furthest extent of arm 2, to be right out, as far out as it can be, so we get the maximum drawable area. But for the opto switch to work as it does for arm 1, the opto switch needs to be further out than that, which puts it like in a weird little routed pocket inside the enclosure, and there's a bunch of ways that can go wrong, so I'd rather avoid that if possible, and this system lets us do that. So this enclosure will sit over the top. This is the top bit. This will be full of sand here, and should be good. So this distance between the top face of that flag and the bottom face of this arm is really critical. It has that gap must be bigger than the top part of the opto switch. So the flag passes through that slot, and arm 1 passes above that slot. So the thickness of that piece there is you need at least that spacing between the two. And so you may notice this one's a bit bent and it's got a bit of crud on the top there. That's where I put some hot glue on the top to soften the plastic a little bit, so I could sort of finesse that slightly. If I take the power off it, you may hear just kissing the top of arm 1. That's just to get absolute maximum distance to give myself, would I turn to a pirate? To give myself enough clearance to fit both above that opto switch and also inside that opto switch. So I reckon this will work pretty well. I do need to add some clamping to hold this down, because it does have a little bit of play in there, which I don't want. And obviously I want to be able to pick this up and move it around and not have the motors fall out, so yeah, that's a given. But right now, this is all in place. I can move on to the edge limiting. So because this situation can happen, I'll just give you a bit of contrast with my hand, where the end of the arm pokes out past this flat, but it's also, it'll collide with the housing if it's in that position. I need to be able to restrict the motion of this arm. Like, I don't ever want it to be able to move out from there. So I'm going to write a filter function that will accept a coordinate and then return the closest point to the center that it can get to for that target coordinate. So that means that this should always stay inside the enclosure, and if it ever tries to go outside, then your pattern will just sort of have a flat part as the ball moves across the outside wall. But in order to be able to do that, I needed a way to home it inside the enclosure, and that's what this lets me do. So, bonza. I did also waste 6 hours fixing my 3D printer, because the extruder stepper motor had a loose wire and it was impossible to diagnose, but then I eventually did. Technology. I hate computers and anything attached to computers. That's about it. Okay, bye-bye.